Welcome to The Big Picture, a show that takes a deep dive into the political landscape of not only America, but right here in our own backyard of Illinois.
It's showtime, folks.
The Big Picture is on WCPT 820. And now, here's your host, Edwin Eisendrath.
All right, well, it's a gray day here, I think, from the edge of the horrible hurricane. It's good to be back. Thank you for your patience while I was away. What did I miss? Well, a debate, for one. I was actually flying during the debate. So when I landed, I started to watch it at the airport, and I wasn't alone. All around me, people were watching highlights, and they were laughing at Donald Trump. Seriously, the more people see and hear him, whether he's debating or hawking trading cards, or, the more they realize he's unfit. Anybody for a gold watch? I mean, seriously? But you know what? You don't get that impression from the sane washing press. For reasons that we need to talk about, Donald Trump is still in a strong position to win this election, and we cannot let that happen. Look, mail-in voting has begun in several states. Polls close in 32 days. Do you remember the last time we were here? Trump was president. Mitch McConnell was in charge of the Senate, and they pushed through the confirmation of Amy Coney Barrett to the Supreme Court. They did it even though votes were being cast. They did it to make sure the new president would lose the opportunity to nominate Ruth Bader Ginsburg's successor and to guarantee the fall of Roe. We should learn from this. Even though the election is officially underway, they will still bend the rules. They will try to cheat. They will try and undermine the confidence we have in our government and in ourselves as sovereigns. Look, I remain confident, but only because I know we will all be vigilant and determined to count every vote, to counter every lie, and after we prevail, to further strengthen the guardrails so damaged by years of, frankly, Democratic neglect and Republican corruption. And let's be clear. It's because of our neglect and their corruption that Donald Trump is today in this position. Look, reporters, sorry lot to begin with, these days, they want us to think that Donald Trump is in position to win because Kamala Harris hasn't answered their questions. That's bunk. The real reason is that the GOP has spent years corrupting the system to give them unfair advantages. And those advantages now appear in the media and in our electoral system. Let's dispose of this self-important claptrap that, it's about Kamala Harris not telling us where she is on the issues. Those same reporters that complain, when they complain they haven't been granted a sit-down interview with her, they don't even bother to ask about Mr. Trump's plans. And don't get me wrong, as you guys know, I think policy ideas are very important. But that's not what the press is concerned with. When they get the chance to interview Kamala Harris, they don't ask her about policy. They ask about Trump. It's systematic of their sickening enthrallment with this man. And look, what voters care about at the end of the day is pretty simple. Whose side are you on? And on that score, Kamala Harris should be winning in a landslide. Mr. Trump is very clear about his side. He's on the side of anyone he can bribe with a tax cut and on the side of white nationalist Christians determined to dominate the rest of us. Look, there are many of these folks in America, but they're nowhere near a majority. These are the folks who cheer when Trump says he'll send armed agents to round up undocumented immigrants. They cheer when he says he'll put them in concentration camps and eventually deport them. They cheer when he says Jews are to be blamed if he loses. They cheer when he says he will execute his political opponents. These are the guys who stormed the U.S. Capitol and beat police with bear spray and flagpoles. Yeah, they're out there, but they are no majority. And that's who he's for. And Kamala Harris, she's also clear what side she's on. She's centered her whole campaign on helping America's middle class. And, unlike Trump and his real identity politics, she's not attempting to win by consolidating animosities. She's reached out to Republicans as well as Democrats. This week, her campaign picked up the endorsement of, I think it was 741 national security leaders, dozens of Republicans, scores of Teamsters locals. That's a broad coalition. No one believes there are more people on Trump's side than Harris's. America isn't dominated by folks who believe that Project 2025 is a good idea. We're not a nation that rejects our diversity. We're not a people cruel enough to celebrate ripping families apart, jailing innocents just because they disagree with us. It's not who we are. On the contrary, we can see from lots of the polling that we're a nation coming together to reject exactly those ideas. So, back where I started, why is Trump in a position to win? Well, look, one reason is that right-wing work to influence the American media has paid off. Large numbers of Americans simply do not know what the candidates and their parties stand for or who they fight for. Today's right-wing media is the most powerful political propaganda machine, maybe ever, certainly in our history. When employment is up, inflation is down, the Dow Jones average has hit record highs, viewers of Fox's business programs, they don't hear about that. Instead, they're told government regulation is driving the economy into the ground. Seriously? This message is as divorced from reality as it is politically potent. That's propaganda. And even news organizations that aren't part of the right-wing propaganda machine, they've buckled under the pressure from right-wing politicians who complain about their coverage. The most influential among them, the New York Times, regularly publishes misleading headlines and stories that, those words, sane-wash Mr. Trump. They now regularly publish more stories about Democrats than about Republicans, and they're critical stories. They even called Mr. Trump's plan to deport 11 million people a housing policy. Really, they've lost their way, and that's because they've buckled. How many times have we seen headlines like this? Great jobs report, but will it last? Inflation is coming down, but there are worries. Biden administration attacks climate change, but is it enough? Really, they can't just tell a good story. But when Trump lies and says he's going to go meet with union workers in Detroit, the media reports the lie as a fact. I mean, seriously, how hard would it have been to say Trump says he'll meet with union workers? Let's see if he does. Nope, not fair, not even. They've buckled to the right wing. And, to make matters worse, the collapse of trusted local news outlets around the country and the transition of news consumption habits to social media platforms have made space for thousands of fake accounts, some run by foreign actors and others by right-wing pundits getting paid by Russian operatives to spread right-wing propaganda. It's taken decades, but the right has succeeded in their effort to capture enough of the media, and certainly the media landscape, to bully the rest of the news folks effectively to keep Americans from the truth about the candidates. That's one reason why Trump is in a position to win. But look, Americans, we're not stupid, and we care about our country, and you can find good journalism if you work at it, and many have. So the right wing, they have to go a step further. Now what they've done is they've tried to corrupt the electoral system itself. I'm sorry about my voice, guys. I apologize. The U.S. Supreme Court, under John Roberts' leadership, has rolled back voting rights, legalized partisan gerrymandering, overturned campaign finance laws. They've permitted unlimited dark money to pour into our politics and pollute it. This amounts to a sustained and decades-long effort to consolidate power in the hands of the wealthiest interests. And look, so you compound their propaganda machine and the effort of the court to consolidate right-wing power, you also have to look at what the states are doing to corrupt the vote. And even now, as the election is underway, there are new attacks on the electoral system. In Georgia, where, don't forget, Mr. Trump has been indicted for attempting to overturn the 2020 election, His teams pushed through rules that make it harder to vote, make it harder for college students to register, that allow for tampering with the vote count, and they permit post-election delays that to result, to report the certification. Look, the Republican Secretary of State, Brad Raffensperger, remember him? He was on the other end of that phone call. He said these new rules permit county officials, this is a quote, to break open ballot boxes. And in Arizona, election deniers now hold positions throughout the state, and intimidation of election workers is an all-time high. John Keller, who's part of the agency that investigates election threats in that state, here's his quote. This new era in which election officials are scapegoated, targeted, and attacked is unconscionable. Meanwhile, the Republicans in that state, they're in court trying to require proof of citizenship to vote, something the courts have long said is an unreasonable restriction on voting. And the Electoral College, it already favors rural minorities, but George Bush in 2000, Donald Trump in 2016, they lost the popular vote, ended up in the White House. So they already got a balance, but they're not satisfied with it. This week, Trump's team pushed hard to change the rules in Nebraska that would disenfranchise tens of thousands and guarantee them one more Republican electoral vote. And you know what? That carpetbagging Senator Lindsey Graham, he left his state and spent his time in Nebraska campaigning for that change. But one Republican state senator, a hero named Mike McDonald, refused to go along. And the attempt to change the rules in the last minute failed. Look, efforts like these to corrupt the system, they've gone on for years. And, they're increasing in number and brazenness as we get closer to Judgment Day. But look, the efforts have done three things. First, they try to limit the votes for Kamala Harris. Second, they open up the possibility to avoid counting Harris votes after they're cast. And third, they undermine trust in the results so that Mr. Trump can attempt, as he did in 2020, to seize power even if he loses. All of this explains why Trump, despite championing unpopular policies and being unpopular himself, is in a position to return to the White House. We're not going to let him. Meanwhile, of course, the media are concerned that Kamala Harris hasn't fully explained the details of her housing tax credit. Good grief. I have a great show for you. I'm going to take a break, get some water, try and get my voice back. We will, don't go away. Michael Tomasky's up next. It's going to be fabulous. Stay with us.
You're listening to The Big Picture with Edwin Eisendrath on WCPT 820.
All right, everybody. Michael Tomasky is the editor of The New Republic. And as I've told you before, he's an author, a journalist, an editor, a very thoughtful guy. He's now also the host of the Inside Story, which is an important, I don't even know what you call these things, video conversation, I guess, that you can find on the New Republic's website. Hello, Michael. Okay, I can't hear you. Possibly the mute's on. Well, we're going to try and get Michael again, and he's still going to be the same smart, really interesting guy when we get him back. So, but wow. I want to know, though, when we get to the end of the show and you call in, I want to know your thoughts on, the efforts to undermine voting that you see going on, whether in your mind it's fair to compare that to the crazy stuff that happened at the end of Trump's last term when he, sort of cheated to get the Supreme Court so he could overturn Roe. And I want to know what you're going to do in the 30 days that we have left, because that makes all the difference. I mean, it's one of those magical times, right? Where the future of the country is something that you actually can put your hand on the scale and make a difference. All right. So how's it going finding Michael? Hello?
Hello?
There you are. Can you hear me, Michael? You can't hear me. Okay.
Now I can. Now, wait. You hear me?
There we go. Hi there.
Hi.
Well, it wouldn't be election season if things weren't going a little wrong sometimes.
Yeah, somebody's listening, Edwin.
Michael, you are a man who thinks carefully about our government and the policies that shape our world. You wrote a whole book, a good book. I read it, about how we can structure the American economy so that more Americans share in our prosperity. But lately, I've been reading your stuff, and you've had to write about, I don't know, Donald Trump blaming Jews for his flailing campaign, or about, and by the way, this was a great line, Calico a la King and Schnauzer Scallopini, or for God's sakes, Lord Boomer. I mean, what does this transformation in this subject matter that you pay attention to say about our politics in our country?
Well, I wonder that almost every day in some way, shape, or form. I mean, the most frustrating and maddening and very often sickening thing, Edwin, is the way that these things that Trump does and that happen in Trump world that would be complete scandals for anybody else just go away. I bet half the people listening to us, if not more, didn't even hear last week that Melania got paid $237,000 to appear at a campaign event. That is unbelievable. Now, it's not known who paid. The suspicion is that the Trump campaign, in some way, shape, or form, through some kind of intermediary, paid. I don't know that. I want to stipulate that I don't know that. Nobody knows who paid her. I hope some investigative journalist is trying to find out, and we don't just let this one go. But the mere fact of a candidate's spouse being paid to make a campaign appearance, that alone is a scandal. That alone, forget who paid. The mere fact of payment is a scandal that no one in the world, no one ever would have done. Ann Romney would not have done this. Laura Bush would not have done this. Barbara Bush would not have done this. Nancy Reagan wouldn't have done it, let alone the Democrats. Nobody would ever have done this. And it was a half-a-day story. It wasn't even a one-day story.
Yeah. This is the party of family values. It's an utter lie. You have another candidate, a congressman, posing with a family that's not even his, so he can pretend he has a wife and children. I mean, and yeah, you're right. I mean, if I were Melania, frankly, I'd want to be paid to stand next to Donald Trump, too. But that they did, it's just revolting.
I mean, she needs her nest egg for when she sets out on her own. We all understand that. But, that's why she wrote this book. A bunch of suckers are going to buy it, and, she's going to make a lot of money. But this, I don't know. I was just particularly incensed by that because, really, like, if Ann Romney had done that, that would have sunk Mitt Romney's campaign. That one thing.
No one would have done it. No one would have thought to have done it.
But nobody would have thought to do it.
No one. All the way back to Martha Washington, no one would have thought to have done it.
No.
It's insane.
Yeah.
But these guys, as you point out, there are no standards or norms of behavior. They are sui generis in our history, and they are as corrupt and vulgar and repulsive. And every day I think they can't get worse, and they get worse.
Yeah.
I watched him hawking his trading cards and his watch this week.
The watch this week? Yeah, I know. These $100,000 for that watch. I mean, others are as cheap as $350. But, I mean, he's just going to grift. Every chance he gets, he's going to grift these people. And I would say these poor people, but they're the ones, they're opening their wallets. It's their choice. And, it's never going to stop. And he knows now, this watch scam, this watch grift is a sign to me that he's more afraid now that he's going to lose than ever. And he knows he's going to be sentenced in late November, and he knows he's going to have legal fees for the rest of his life. And, not that he pays them probably, but,
well, he's got to lose first, for sure.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, just the idea, though, I mean, first I want to say, it didn't occur to me when I read your book that you could be as funny as you have been in some of the things that you've written about, the grift or the line about Schnauzer Scalapini, and, all that was pretty fabulous.
Thank you. Yeah, well, tell Stephen Colbert. Maybe he'll take me on as a writer.
Yeah, no, I don't think so. That's not where you belong, I don't think.
All right, okay.
So I wonder, while we're on the topic of, the just craziness on the right, I wonder whether it's a feature rather than a flaw in their strategy. I mean, we're in one of those incredible times, rare, when individual Americans really can put their thumb on the scale of our history in the next 30 days and shape not just our future, but the whole world's. But the grotesque, outlandish, strange, norm-busting, pick your words, behaviors on display every day, to me, they so obscure the seriousness of the moment. I wonder whether this cartoonishness, this transgressiveness, both attracts some people on the one hand, but also distracts everybody else. You think that's possible?
Well, yes, it certainly does. On the other hand, I would say this, and I've been thinking about this lately. Harris, you and I, and people like us, when we talk about Trump, we mostly talk about him as a danger and a threat and a serious. We talk about him in a serious way, and God knows he's all those things, so we should. But I noticed that Harris often has a more mocking tone, and makes fun of some of the stupid stuff he does and says. And I wonder if that might not be more effective, with the typical, swing voter, who maybe doesn't care that much about or doesn't see the ways in which Trump is a threat to democracy in the way that you and I and your listeners do, but do see that what the hell is he doing talking about Hannibal Lecter? Maybe that's more effective with that kind of voter. I don't know.
I had this experience, Michael. I was in an airplane during the debate, missed it, watched it in the airport as soon as I landed. And it turns out I wasn't alone because all around me, people were watching either the debate or excerpts from the debate at night in an airport. And they were laughing out loud at the things they heard from Donald Trump. Like I heard random cackling all over this airport, and I would go see it. It was people watching him. So, I mean, maybe, the more people now see him and they're focusing in a different way, the fever might be breaking.
I think I sense that it might be. Yeah, I really do. He's an act, right? He's not a serious human being. He's an act. And he's been an act since he burst on the scene in New York. And then he had his TV show, and that was a different kind of act. And now, since he entered politics in 2015, he's been yet another kind of act. And I think finally the act is getting old. He has his admirers, obviously. He has millions of admirers and always will. We understand that. It's maddening, but it is. But there's the crucial sliver of people who, again, like, the swing voter who'll decide the election, who took a flyer on him in 2016 because he's a businessman and because he said he drained the swamp and because, those people have been trained for 25 years to hate Hillary. But I think for those people, maybe they were amused by his act for a little while. But I think the act is old now. And I think he's going to, in these next 5 weeks, do some crazy stuff that's going to make people say, what?
I do too. He's got to, I mean, this is a man who's jealous when a hurricane gets a headline and he doesn't. Yeah. Right. So he's going to, and he's not in charge of the daily narrative anymore. And that, that he's got to just be insane about that and going to do crazy things.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's a really important point. You just said two really important words: daily narrative, which I wrote about in my last piece, which posted yesterday, Friday, at tnr.com for those who are interested in seeing it. But campaigns are about narratives. Campaigns are looked at one way. They're a series of news cycles, and you got to win the news cycle. You got to that means setting the agenda of the day. That means playing offense. That means saying or doing something that makes reporters go to the other camp and say, how do you respond to X? And so Harris, I think she did a great job of that for the first 4 weeks of her candidacy, and I think it's tapered off a little bit. And she's lost a little bit, not a lot, but a little bit of that initial momentum. And I think it's important to play that offensive role that sort of sets the narrative and makes Trump react, because he will react badly.
Yeah, so I agree with you. Who could possibly sustain that rocket she was on? Right. Yeah. So it's got to come back down to earth a little bit. But so this week, she instead gave a economic policy speech, and then she went to the border and gave a border speech.
Right.
How did you think those went?
I think those both went fine. They're both, to me, they're both more defense than offense, because she's answering a criticism there in both cases, that she hasn't been specific enough and that she's weak on the border or whatever. Personally, from a purely ideological point of view, am I thrilled that she's kind of taking a tough tone on the border? Not necessarily, but, I understand that, in politics, in campaigns, it's smart to go at your opponent's strength and try to take it away and neutralize it and try to make it a strength of your own. Campaigns that do that tend to do well and tend to win. This is what most famously George W. Bush did in 2004 against John Kerry with his war record. So I see why it's smart politics. And I thought the economic speech was good. And I think it's plenty specific. People saying now that they don't know what she stands for, that's your fault, not hers. She's got a program. It's out there, and it's plenty more detailed. What's his program? What the hell is his program? I might ask those people who complain about hers. Tariffs are going to solve everything.
Those people, I'm afraid, are in your profession. They're journalists. Yeah. Regular people aren't asking this question. Journalists are asking this question. And I'm sort of shocked that they're still asking it. And, Donald Trump's plan is Project 2025. You can read it. It's out there. It's detailed. And he can run away from it. But he'll fill his government with the people who are going to do that. So it doesn't, that's his plan. And don't ask him.
Yeah, right. She's being held to the normal standard, which is fine because it's normal, but he's not being held to that normal standard because he doesn't, because he's so abnormal, and it ends up being ridiculously unfair to Harris. She's got a platform. She's said plenty of specific things about the economy and about all kinds of other things. And Trump, denies that Project 2025 is his program, which is a lie because we've heard him praise it. Yeah, so it's a bald-faced lie. And then to the extent that he answers questions on the stump, from non-credulous, non-sycophantic journalists, every answer is tariffs. Tariffs will pay for that. Tariffs will pay for that. Child care, tariffs will pay for it. Anything. Yeah, that's all he says. And he doesn't even. It's not clear he knows. Tariffs aren't paid by the country sending goods. Tariffs, in the vast majority of cases, are paid at the point of entry by the importer.
Right.
By the importer.
Right. Yes.
And then those costs are passed on to consumers. That's why people call tariffs a tax, because it is, in essence, a tax on consumers, because it raises the price of a car or a refrigerator or a baseball or whatever it is. I don't think Trump even understands this. He says it's going to pay for everything.
magical thing. The New York Times did something on housing policy that it's how they lose their way. The editors may be trying to be fair 1,000 times, but they should wake up and look around and determine that where they are is nowhere near reality. And of course, I'm talking about deporting 11 million people as a housing policy, right? Because they said it. And it's appalling. It made me think, first, what do you think of that? And then
That piece was the nadir of New York Times coverage of this campaign season. And that's saying something because while the Times is the greatest newspaper in the English language and has many excellent reporters and does a ton of terrific journalism, some of its political journalism, some of its coverage of Trump is terrible. And it's just not rooted in reality. And they won't, for example, when they cover, they've started to do it a little bit because of the pressure that some folks, like the New Republic, have applied. But, when they cover his rallies, they kind of clean it up.
Sane washing, as we call it.
Yeah, sane washing. Yeah, they clean it up. They sane wash it. They say what his policy points were. They don't mention, typically, his digressions about Hannibal Lecter and would you rather be eaten by a shark or electrocuted and those kinds of weird things that he says. They leave those on the cutting room floor. And I've looked at this, because I watch Morning Joe, because I go on Morning Joe sometimes, and Morning Joe chronicles these crazy things that he says religiously, and then I go Google to see if the Times and the Post and the Associated Press mentions them, and often they didn't. Sometimes they do at the very bottom of the story, but often they don't even mention. These things bear on his mental fitness. Now, to return to this housing story, is the worst story I've seen this campaign cycle, and just they called the Trump campaign and said, what is your housing policy? And the Trump campaign said, our housing policy, as you just noted, is to deport millions of people, and that's going to decrease demand, and that's going to lower housing prices. I wouldn't even have printed that if I were an editor at the New York Times. How could you do that, the dignity of printing that, taking it even that seriously?
It was after I saw that I thought, I hope somebody there is looking at this and looking at reality and going, whatever steps we took to get here, even if we defend every one of them, where we find ourselves is not telling the truth to the American people, and that's not what we're supposed to be doing. And I remember, I'm so old, but I'm sorry, a great journalist named Walter Cronkite told the country lies night after night. And he was like the New York Times in his era. He was the most important journalism going on. Everybody watched him. And he lied day in and day out because he listened to the government. And he went by himself. He went on his own to Vietnam. He came back. He said, you know what? This is not winnable. And that was a moment where journalism saved its own credibility. And I'm sort of waiting for the New York Times to have their Walter Cronkite moment where they go, oops, we're sorry. Our sources were wrong. We did the wrong thing. This is what the reality is.
I wouldn't recommend
I shouldn't hold my breath.
I mean, I'm sure some people listening saw this interview earlier this year by the Times editor Joseph Kahn, which he did with Ben Smith of Semaphore. If you missed it, you should go read it. It tells you everything about how the Times is covering this race. That they don't think it's he doesn't think it's the New York Times' job to defend democracy. That democracy is an issue in this election, and it's the idea of it, the definition of it, is contested by the two camps, and it's just the New York Times' job to present those two ideas and let the readers decide. Well, I mean, I guess I guess that sounds responsible to some ears, but no, I'm sorry, it's not. One side's idea of democracy is that the 2020 election was stolen from them by people who are ineligible to vote, by which they mean mainly black people, and who cheated massively through these mail ballots, and who stole the election from the rightful winner, Donald Trump. Sorry, that's not one side of the story. You know, two sides of the story are when both people are making kind of valid points. That's not a valid point. You know, it's not your job as a journalist to say, you know, Joe says the grass is green and the sky is blue, while Tom says, you know, the grass is blue and the sky is green, and, you know, you, reader, can decide. Well, no. One of those realities is true and the other one isn't.
Well, right. So Michael, the two things, three things about that. I read that interview and I thought, first off, he's wrong. They actually have an obligation to democracy. That's why they're in the Constitution. But even if that wasn't what they thought, that's not what they're doing. They're not covering it fairly, regardless. So saying, well, we're not there to protect democracy. Okay, great. Protect the truth. That may be, you know, so you got to do one of them. But on protecting the truth, if one guy says the sky is orange and the other guy says the sky is blue, the reporter can say, one guy said the sky is orange, one guy said the sky is blue, but you know what? I'm standing outside and the sky is blue. Right? You know, reporters can actually do a little bit of work and say, and they don't have to just report what people say. They can say, you know what? Donald Trump didn't show up to meet those union workers. It's not that hard.
Right. Yeah. That gets done sometimes, but it doesn't get done enough. And you know, the way I put it is this: there are two old traditional values of mainstream objective journalism. One is truth, to print the truth. The other is to be fair to both sides or all sides. And truth and fairness, you know, in our history exist in some tension, but typically it's a manageable tension. But ever since Donald Trump came along, it's an unmanageable tension, because you can't be fair to somebody why should you be fair to somebody who lies every time he opens his mouth? And I think too many outlets, and this is true often, not always, but often of the times, and other major outlets, when truth and fairness are at odds, they always favor fairness. They always go for fairness over truth because they're afraid of being called liberal.
So this is why I think it's your moment, the New Republic's moment. You know, these major media organizations, of course, they still do great reporting, but their courage has failed them. Yeah. And Americans are looking for news they can trust. And when you make the decision that you just talked about that abandons truth, well, you know what? It's not, then they can't be trusted. I mean, I guess you can be trusted by pandering to somebody's point of view, but that doesn't last. Honesty does.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's why I think you are in a great place doing great work.
Well, it's very kind of you, and I mean, we're doing our best, and yeah, people should come read us and listen. Please listen to Greg Sargent's daily podcast. He delves into these issues with some regularity, and he's great. And by the way, I also want to say, you know, we don't print nothing but puff pieces about Kamala Harris. We print some tough pieces about her and about the Democrats. You know, we don't, you know, like, you know, her border policy we've been critical of. We've been critical of her climate policy in some respects. We'll print critical pieces. I mean, it's quite clear who we're for. You know, we want her to win. But, you know, we're capable of calling them as we see them. But mostly, you know, we print negative stuff about Trump, and
just right now.
You're not likely to see a positive word about Donald Trump in our pages.
Yeah. There's no, I don't want to go there. As we have 30 days left, like you and I began this conversation saying, you know, he's going to do more insane things that are more insane. Like, did you have something in mind, or is his just imagination like an impossible place to get in?
Yeah, I don't really know. It's hard to predict, but I just think that if he continues to be behind, and I think he will, she's ahead, right? I mean, it's close. It's within the margin of error, especially in the swing states, in most polls. But I'd rather be Harris than Trump, and I think that her lead will expand a little bit. I also think that polls maybe aren't. I don't know. I don't study polls in terms of how they're weighted and stuff like that. I just don't look at that, so I could be wrong here. But I bet that polls are underweighting black women, who I think are going to turn out in crazy numbers. So I think Harris's support might be being a little bit underestimated. But I just think that Trump he's gonna snap. He's gonna say something, that he shouldn't say. He's gonna make accusations for which he will obviously have no basis in reality, and that will be, a little more outrageous than what he's done before. The problem with being an outrage machine is that, you have to top last week's outrage.
How do you top what they've done to that small town in Ohio, where Haitians aren't eating other people's pets, and yet now they've had to cancel schools? They're in lockdown because of these threats. How do you top that?
Well, they'll find a way. I don't have much doubt that they'll find a way. It's disgusting what they're trying to do to that place, and to say, as J.D. Vance said, that it doesn't even matter whether it's true. We just had to talk this way to get the media to pay attention to it. It's such an abomination. I mean, first of all, the media was paying attention to Springfield, Ohio. It wasn't on cable news every day, okay? But, there were loads of stories about the influx of the Haitian community, and the good and the difficult aspects of it, the taxing of the social services, but also, the way they, helped, manufacturers by taking jobs. So it got covered certainly in the Ohio press and to a considerable extent in the national press. So he's just lying. He's just lying. It's terrible. But, they'll get worse.
On the reality that's behind this politics, every state in America has had declining birth rates for the last 10 years. I mean, some dramatically. I mean, like Vermont's gone down 13%, for gosh sakes. There's really big declines in birth rates. And America's population hasn't shrunk because of immigration.
Yeah.
But this isn't great replacement theory. I mean, I guess they're trying, and some of what the Republicans are trying inartfully to say is it would be good for our country if people had bigger families. But then, and I don't disagree with that, but where are the policies to make it easier to have kids? Where are the policies to make it affordable to raise kids in America? The Republicans are, I mean, this is where, we can actually have a policy discussion. Instead, they want to make it a sort of grotesque mockery. But there are things we could do that would help people start families.
Well, Edwin, tariffs are going to pay for all that. Don't worry.
Yeah. Right. The price of milk will go way up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's they don't have policies, and he's scrambling around, throwing out these tax cuts. I don't know. That'll fool some people, but I mean, he imposed the cap on the state and local tax deduction. I think most people who pay that know that because they were deducting their entire state and local tax bill until 2018, when they were only allowed to deduct $10,000. I think they know. They know who did that.
Yep. Well, I mean, one of the things that America's got to remember after we win is that the crypto guys and the oil guys, they were all in for Donald Trump because they thought they could bribe him. And leaving aside that it's corrupt, it undermines our sense of democracy so much that we really need to have stronger guardrails.
Yeah, we really do. And, thank you, Supreme
Let's
Court.
you and I take a second to just show our bipartisan credentials here. What do you think of Eric Adams?
Yeah, well, he's unbelievably corrupt. Everybody's innocent until proven guilty, I suppose, in a court of law. But, that doesn't mean that the person has the right to go on being the mayor of the biggest city in the United States. I covered New York City politics for a long time, so I know my share about corrupt New York City Democrats. He should resign. Let somebody else run that city while he goes about his defense, such as it is.
I mean, my state here in Illinois is historically somewhat corrupt. I was a member of the Chicago City Council, which I think is, if you measure per capita convictions, the most corrupt body in America, mostly Democrats.
Right.
But New York, man, it gives us a run for our money, and your characters are bigger. I mean, you got Donald Trump, Rudy Giuliani, Andrew Cuomo, I guess, and now this mayor. These are, you're a lot more flamboyant about the criminality than anybody else.
I guess so. Yeah. When I was young, there was a big scandal while Ed Koch was mayor. Koch was singed, but he wasn't personally involved. It involved a couple of borough presidents who went to jail, and one ended up killing himself. It was a good old-fashioned parking violations bureau scandal where people, back when people had to put quarters in parking meters, and they skimmed a bunch of money off the top. That's how you like your urban scandals.
Yep.
It's pretty Chicago too, if you ask me.
Very. So corruption is bipartisan, but I don't think it's been, sort of petty and cheap on the Democratic side. Republican corruption it's vastly more expensive, but it isn't just that it's that they use it to bend the rules of the system.
Yeah.
And then it makes democracy harder.
Well, Republican corruption, for example, is, Richard Nixon subverting the Paris peace talks and prolonging the Vietnam War so he could get elected president.
Yes.
That's pretty bad.
I suspect the war in Ukraine is going on. It certainly can't end until the election.
Yeah. Now, President Harris, God willing, will have to talk to Zelensky about some settlement that he can live with. It is true that we can't just do this forever, and I don't think it's in the cards for Ukraine to beat them.
Right.
So she'll have to get him to settle, but, it's a hell of a lot better than what Donald Trump's going to do, which is just give the keys.
Which is to get them to lose. Yeah.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. And I think the same in the Middle East. I think Bibi is not – Joe Biden has worked harder than anybody imaginable to end the carnage in that part of the world. And I don't think Bibi would never allow it. He's waiting until after the election.
Yeah, well, he's doing everything he can to help Trump. It's pretty obvious he's desperate for Trump to win. Because Trump will let him do whatever he wants. And there's not. This is another thing on which we've been critical of Harris and Biden, and lately Tony Blinken on Gaza, and just continuing to write a blank check for these arms. I hope Harris changes that to some extent, at least when she gets in there. And obviously the world needs a different government in that country.
It's not our job to pick governments and democracies, but it is our right to talk about where we will send arms, for sure.
It is, and there's existing U.S. law right now, for example, that prevents Americans from investing in settlements in the occupied territories, and we just don't enforce it. It's never enforced. Just start by enforcing that. It doesn't have anything to do with Gaza. It has to do with the West Bank, but start by enforcing that. That would wake some people up.
Yeah, I'm proud of the millions and millions of people in Israel that protest every day.
Yeah.
I mean, I just think about I think about what if Donald Trump, God forbid, actually won. We would see that in America. We would see tens of millions of people every day.
We would. Yeah, no, they're very brave and very admirable people, and there are very many Israelis who hate what Netanyahu is doing in their name, and that makes me very angry at this certain strand of leftism in America that calls everybody a Zionist. No, that's very wrong. It's a very wrong thing to do. There are Israelis who want peace and who seek justice for Palestinians, and to write them off is an abomination.
Well, I'm just looking at the clock, and you and I are about out of time. Once again, I want to not leave without giving you a chance to tell people how to get involved with the work of the New Republic. It's just fabulous what you guys do, whether it's deep dives into policy or responding to the reality we live in and writing about, Trump's cartoon.
Well, thanks so much. TNR.com is the website, and we have pieces posted every day looking at different aspects of this race. We have if you want fast hits, we have a great breaking news operation that'll tell you every nutty thing Trump said and Trump and Vance and the whole parade of them said and did that day. And I think we do that breaking news thing very well. But then we have longer pieces, analytical pieces. And we still publish a print magazine 10 times a year, and some people still like to read it, and I would encourage anybody to subscribe. You can subscribe. You can get the print copy, or you can subscribe to it digitally. Kamala is going to be on the next cover, and it's a gorgeous cover. I can't wait to let the world see it. So please, come give us a look.
It's news you can trust. Listen, everybody, you're hearing the editor. This is honest, hardworking journalism, not lost, like our friends at the New York Times, who do some honest, hardworking journalism. It's really important. So support it. Thank you, Michael. As always, it's great to talk.
Thank you, Edwin. Always a pleasure.
Yep. All right, everybody, we're going to take a break for the news. We'll be right back.
You're listening to The Big Picture with Edwin Eisendrath on WCPT 820.
Welcome back. David DeWitt, editor-in-chief of the Ohio Capital Journal, is back with us again. As you guys all know, I began years ago describing Ohio as the land that democracy forgot. But brave people in that state, Americans who knew in their souls that we are not, children to be told what to do, but citizens who have a responsibility to government, they have fought and fought and fought in Ohio. They protected their right to amend the state's constitution. They amended it to protect abortion rights. And they amended it to end gerrymandering. But of course, the ruling political operation ignored it. Now they're trying again, this time to amend it with an enforcement mechanism on gerrymandering. This is a fierce and ugly fight. But I am so proud of Ohio, and I'm so proud of the reporting in Ohio that's, telling people what's really going on. And David is a huge part of that. David, welcome back.
Thank you so much, Edwin. That was very kind of you. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Well, I'm in awe of what people are doing, standing up for their democracy like that. But look, hey, but by now most people have heard. I want to get to that fight about gerrymandering in a bit, but I want to start somewhere else. When that is, Springfield, Ohio. You wrote just a beautiful piece about this carpet of calumny, that's meant to create racial strife in America. But you said it hit close to home. So will you take some time and tell us all about sort of your senator and what's happened to this town?
Yeah, so basically, it started really originally with a neo-Nazi who went to a Springfield City Commissioners meeting, and he's part of something called Blood Pride. I don't know. I can't keep all that Nazi case straight. But anyway, he went to the City Council Commissioners meeting and made these wild allegations about Haitians eating pets, and as I understand it, he was thrown out of the commission meeting. But it took hold in the far extremist right-wing internet, right? So I'm sitting at my desk one Monday afternoon, and I see that Ohio's U.S. Senator J.D. Vance, the vice presidential nominee for the Republicans, has amplified this story that Haitian people are eating people on Twitter or X, the Elon Musk propaganda machine. He put this out there. So it was shocking to me on a couple of levels because 3 generations of my family lived in Springfield for their whole lives. So my great-grandparents, my grandparents, and my parents all both grew up in Springfield. I went to Springfield my entire life to visit my grandparents there. I know Springfield as well as I know any other city in Ohio, and I still go back there often to visit. I still have family there. I still like to go to Mike and Rosie's Deli and Young's Jersey Dairy and all these places. And it's funny because in my childhood, Springfield was thriving for a little while, but the early part of my childhood, back in the 80s, it was doing pretty well. And over the course of my life, you've seen the community, it lost population, streets emptied. It hit some rough times there for a little bit. And apparently what's happened is in recent years, starting around 2018, 2019, the city did a revitalization thing because this is an old kind of industrial city. It was home to International Harvester, places like that. And so they wanted to revive their manufacturing. And so they set out this plan to revive manufacturing. But the problem is they couldn't get workers, really. The local population, they couldn't fill these jobs, these manufacturing jobs. So they ended up working with staffing agencies, and they ended up getting a lot of Haitians were attracted to this type of thing because, there's a strong Haitian population already in Florida and New York and some other places in the United States. But they heard that there were well-paying jobs with a low cost of living. And so they started coming to Springfield to fill these manufacturing jobs. And so I was aware of all of this because my partner's Haitian. And so, basically half of my family is also Haitian. So I know Haitian people very well. They're very dear to my heart. I love them. They're immigrants, they've lived here for 30 years at this point, so they're not newly arrived like a lot of the Haitians who are in Springfield are. But the whole Haitian community down in Florida, they're very close to me. And so when I'm sitting at my desk and I see Ohio's U.S. Senator use a community that's very dear to my heart, 2 communities, and make this vile, racist nonsense, right-wing Nazi lunacy from the extremist internet to victimize both Haitian people and the Springfield community. I mean, it blew my mind. It was one of the most just gross, callous, cowardly, irresponsible, reckless, racist thing I could imagine him doing. For what? To slake the thirst of his own ambition, right? So it makes it even more gross. Like, what kind of human being is this that does this? And he's doing it to his own constituents. He's doing it to his own community. So I wrote my column, and I knew it was going to be bad. But my goodness, it was so much worse than even I thought it might be, a couple days news. No, he provoked weeks worth of bomb threats and threats of public violence against the community. He provoked people to come there, search. I mean, everything that he said is debunked, and he still won't admit that. But there's no eating of the pets. There's no eating of the geese. There's no rise in communicable diseases. There's no rise in crime or murder rates. Like, the Republican officials in Clark County and Springfield, Ohio, have debunked every one of those things that he's tried to claim. They've tried to come to Springfield, and they said, no, we do not want you here. That came out today. They turned them down. They've created chaos, bomb threats in the community of evacuated hospitals and public school buildings and the BMV and the city buildings and the courthouses, many elementary schools. And meanwhile, you've got the local pastor saying, I love the Haitians. They're filling up my churches. And of course they are, because they're very religious. And then you have the factory workers saying, yeah, they're not on drugs. They show up on time. They do all their work. They're in a good mood. They're happy. They're contributing. And then you have the business people saying they're opening businesses. They're opening restaurants. They're contributing to the community. Like, there was no chaos in Springfield until J.D. Vance and Donald Trump brought chaos to Springfield. So it's been disturbing to see.
And J.D. Vance admitted it was a lie. And he said he just wanted to lie in order to get the press to pay attention to immigration. Like, that hasn't been an issue on the radar screen for 8 years, 10 years, 20 years.
Yeah. And also, I mean, that's like, the Springfield News-Sun has been reporting on this for years. The Dayton Daily News has been reporting on this for years. Like, the New York Times, the week before he made his vile comment, did a feature on Springfield. So that just doesn't make any sense. He was shining the spotlight on it by using racist lies and stoking hate. Like, come on. Does he think
your governor, who's a Republican, and has, not championed anything that I felt was right almost ever, came to the defense of Springfield.
Oh, yeah. That's because Mike DeWine's a, normal human being. So, of course, he's going to. And Mike DeWine's from that area of the state anyway. So, of course, he's going to go there and talk to the Republican officials who lead the area and ask what's going on, and they're going to tell him the truth, and he's going to go out there and tell the people of Ohio the truth. Unfortunately, what he won't do in the extra step is condemn what his party's leaders are doing to these Ohio communities. I suppose he thinks... Well, at least he's going out there saying the truth. Unfortunately, I can't think of any other statewide Republican Ohio official who would go out there and tell the truth, because Lieutenant Governor John Husted, who wants to run in 2026, was making jokes about it on Twitter. And then Attorney General Dave Yost, who wants to be governor in 2026, he was also questioning whether the geese thing might be true, and then he was using Springfield as an example of immigrants terrorizing our communities, literally just a week before in a press release. So, yes, Mike DeWine is admirable. I don't know if he has any company that would actually go on national television and tell the truth, though.
Just appalling. Let's turn to this battle over gerrymandering. First, set the table by telling us what the current referendum, why there's a referendum now, and why do people think they need one after having done one a few years ago?
Yeah, I'll try to, it's long and complicated, but I'll try to do it as quickly as I can. Basically, in 2011, Republicans produced some of the most gerrymandered maps in the country. Over the last, my entire life, Ohio's been gerrymandered. Democrats did it in the 80s, Republicans did it in the 90s, the 2000s. 2011, they went off the chain and just did the worst gerrymandering ever. For instance, in 2012, Ohio voted for Obama, but our congressional races were 12-4 Republican to Democrat. So voters had enough in the by 2015, voters are like, this is ridiculous. These districts are shameful. We're going to pass gerrymandering reform. The politicians, and they had tried to do it a couple times before, it didn't work. This time the politicians got involved themselves, and they said, all right, we're going to go through the legislature, and we're all going to pass gerrymandering reform together. But it's still going to leave politicians in charge of the process. So they did that in 2015 and 2018 for state house and congressional. The redistricting process actually comes around in 2021. And what happens is the Republican politicians who control the commission, it's a 7-member commission. Republicans have 5 members on it. Democrats have 2 because they won all the governor, the Secretary of State, auditor in 2018. So 2021, they go to draw the districts, and they draw just as bad gerrymandered districts that give them all the advantages. They draw every competitive seat Republican, every every Republican seat is safe, and they give them like an enormous super majority advantage when Ohio's it's a Republican state, but it's like a 56-43 if you average the last 10 years. But they have 67 seats in the 99-seat House, for instance. So that's how bad the gerrymandering is. So they have this veto-proof supermajorities that aren't reflective of the state. And so they did it worse. They had redistricting reform, and they did worse gerrymandering in 2021. So they went to the Ohio Supreme Court, and they said, no, this is a bipartisan majority on the court said, no, this is gerrymandered. And then they did it again and again and again. And they refused to produce a not gerrymandered map in defiance of the Ohio Supreme Court. The Supreme Court was wondering at one point whether to hold them in contempt for just ignoring the court. And so they ran this out all the way until it was getting to summer of 2022 when you had an election coming up and you had to print ballots soon enough and stuff. So a federal court with 2 Donald Trump appointees in a split decision did not say that the maps were not unconstitutionally gerrymandered. They just said, you're out of time. You have to use these bad maps for the 2022 election. And so in 2022, voters in Ohio were forced to use unconstitutionally gerrymandered maps to elect our current General Assembly, the people who are sitting now in our state house. They're currently sitting in unconstitutionally gerrymandered districts. So after that happened, the Republican swing vote on the Ohio Supreme Court, Maureen O'Connor, she was forced to retire due to age. So she had to leave the court. And she decided then, along with a bunch of other just good government activists in Ohio, that this process broke down and we need to kick politicians out of the process altogether and replace them with a citizens commission. So since then, they've been working on this proposal that would do exactly that. And that's what Ohio is voting on in November here. It's a proposal to move the politicians from the redistricting process and replace them with a 15-member citizen board made up of 5 Republican citizens, 5 Democratic citizens, and 5 independent citizens.
David, that was very clear. But now I got to ask you, because I think my least favorite office holder in your state, well, it's probably J.D. Vance, but next is a guy named Frank LaRose, whose job it is as Secretary of State to write the text, right, that goes with on the ballot so people can understand what they're voting. How did he describe an amendment that says you're not allowed to gerrymander? What was the language he put on there, and how is it that language has survived court challenges?
Yeah, so what's happened is Frank LaRose has repeatedly used his position as what should be a nonpartisan election administrator to try to rig the game for Republicans. And so he did it by participating in the gerrymandering that I just talked about. He voted for all of those unconstitutional maps and forced them onto Ohio voters. And this is after he ran in 2018, saying how terrible gerrymandering was. So he voted for the gerrymandering anyway, forced through the unconstitutional maps. He was the spearhead of the effort to strip away Ohioans' constitutional powers and raise the threshold for passing amendments last August. And he openly opposed the November abortion rights amendment, which is why they actually ended up declaring openly that they wanted to take voters' power away with the threshold amendment. And so he lost both of those things, and then he lost his primary to Bernie Moreno running for U.S. Senate this year. And remember, in that November abortion amendment, he used his position on the Ohio ballot board to also do deceptive ballot language that totally misconstrued the actual proposed abortion rights amendments last November, right? Mm-hmm. And voters passed it anyway, 57%. So, and this is unprecedented. We've never had a Secretary of State abuse their office so openly to write clearly loaded and biased language onto the ballot summaries. But nevertheless, under Trumpism, here we are. Frank LaRose is all in on abusing his office in the most unprecedented ways. So we get around to this year, the anti-abortion amendment. Remember, he voted for gerrymandering. He opposes the anti-gerrymandering amendment, and he once again used his position at the Ohio ballot board to write incredibly misleading and biased language against the anti-gerrymandering amendment, saying actually that the amendment requires gerrymandering, which is funny because it actually uses the same language to ban gerrymandering as the current constitutional amendment. It's almost the exact same language. Nevertheless, if anybody actually reads their ballot summary, Frank LaRose's personally written language is going to say that the anti-gerrymandering amendment requires gerrymandering. So that's where we're at on people using their office.
The Supreme Court said he was allowed to do that.
Yeah, so after Maureen O'Connor was forced by age to retire from the Supreme Court, Republicans in Ohio did two things. They added partisan labels to the Supreme Court races, and they were previously nonpartisan races. By doing that, they were able to, because remember, Ohio is a Republican state, so they were able to win a majority on the court who, first of all, they would rubber stamp any sort of gerrymandering by Republicans. They didn't have to worry anymore about the Supreme Court ruling against their gerrymandering now that they have this new Supreme Court majority. So when that decision about the ballot language came to them both times, both last November and this November, they made one small tweak last November. They made two small tweaks this November and otherwise rubber stamped it. Now, we do have 3 Ohio Supreme Court races in November that are incredibly significant if voters care about the balance of the court, because if Democrats win all 3, they would have a 4-3 majority on the court. If Republicans win all 3, though, it becomes a 6-1 court. So.
One of the members of the Supreme Court, I think, is the son of the governor. And so the governor is making like he's a normal human being down around Springfield, but his son is participating in all of these really legal travesties at the court.
Well, yeah, and actually another justice became the chief justice after there was an open seat, so DeWine appointed a family friend to the court. And this guy's a guy with no previous judicial experience. He was a pretty radical Hamilton County prosecutor before he joined the court. He's never been a judge in his life, but DeWine appointed him to the court because he likes him, I guess. They're close family friends. But this guy, who just ruled on this ballot language, he just said on right-wing radio over the weekend that the only reason Democrats want redistricting reform is because they can't win. And he said that he thinks it's humorous to watch. When the other side that can't win, they want to change the rules. That's what he said. Now, this is a sitting justice of the Ohio Supreme Court violating all kinds of norms and codes of conduct about ethics, judicial ethics, and if you should talk about cases that are before the court or coming before the court or likely to come before the court. And it is just, again, full-on partisanship. Yeah. Without any regard for any of the institutions or anything that really makes America's democracy truly function. He's just weighing in. I mean, it would be like a U.S. Supreme Court justice talking about.
Oh yeah, like flying a flag upside down. Sure, like unheard of.
Yeah,
yeah. The judicial corruption is. Yeah. So we've been talking about all these things that are just incredible obstacles to the people of Ohio who want to govern themselves, whether it's a senator lying about a city in order to cause racial injustice and chaos, or an elected official lying about ballot language to try and mislead voters, and a political Supreme Court doing politics instead of law. And yet Ohioans have time and time again beaten these guys in these referendums. So it's inspiring because people keep trying. Let me turn in the short time we have left. I don't think my listeners know enough about the man who's trying to take out Sherrod Brown, the Democratic incumbent, and it's a very close race. Talk about Bernie Moreno. He's been making some news lately.
Yeah, so Bernie Moreno he's a Cleveland area businessman who is actually an immigrant himself. He came to the United States from Colombia when he was 5, became a citizen when he was 18, I believe. And he's been a businessman in Northeast Ohio in the auto dealership industry mostly. And he originally ran for Senate in 2022. Dropped out of that race, but this is now his second. So this is now his second run for the U.S. Senate, and so far, I mean, he's been. This is the tightest race we've ever seen for Sherrod. I'd say this race and John Tester will really determine control of the U.S. Senate. Sherrod has had about a 5-point lead most of the year. That dropped closer in some recent polls, but down to 2. I think one actually showed Bernie within 2 ahead, maybe. So it's often within the margin of error. But there was a New York Times Siena poll that just came out today, and that's a pretty well-respected poll. It's a pretty good one. Whatever you think of the Times coverage and editorial decisions, the polls are really good. So that one was interesting because it showed Sherrod 4 points ahead, which is pretty close to the margin of error there. But what I found interesting about it was that it showed Sherrod pulling 10 points with Trump voters. So even if Moreno captured all of the undecided Trump voters, he would still need to eat into Sherrod's support with Trump voters in order to win. So I just thought that was an interesting tidbit that I saw today. But Moreno he's running mostly on your regular Republic. He's running for an immigrant. He's running an incredibly anti-immigration campaign. He even latched onto the whole Haitians thing, even though those are legal immigrants, and they're supposed to be against illegal immigrants, not legal ones. And even though those Haitian immigrants are legal immigrants, it still attacks them.
Didn't he go after women for caring about abortion rights?
Yeah, so originally, before Dobbs was overturned, he would say that he was 100% against abortion, no exceptions for rape and incest, no exceptions, that's what he said, 100%, no exceptions. And then after the Dobbs decision, he started saying that he was for a 15-week abortion ban. And now I think a national 15-week abortion ban. And now I think with Trump and JD hedging and dodging and refusing to say, really, Bernie doesn't know what to say. So, you could tell he still wants a 15-week national abortion ban, but he says things like it's mostly up to the states. So he's trying to have it both ways. But he made national news this week by going after, he said that a lot of Ohio suburban women are one-issue voters who only care about abortion. If they can't have abortion whenever they want, they're voting for someone else. And he said he made a crack about women over 50, why would they even care about abortion rights?
What an idiot.
So that's the national news because obvious, not like people who can't get pregnant, you still care about abortion,
Well, David, it's very hard to break through and make national news as Republican. You're competing with the insane J.D. Vance, the even crazier Donald Trump, and the madman who is the lieutenant governor running for governor as a black Nazi in North Carolina. So if you make national news as Republican, it is not a good thing. That is a hell of a stream to want to swim in. Anyway, David, we've run out of time. Thank you so much, as always, for not just taking the time to talk to me and my listeners, but for the work you do that gives heart to the people of Ohio for this enormous battle they've been waging for a long time. Thank you.
Thank you, Edwin. Always great to talk to you. Take care.
Bye. All right, everyone, we're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, you're going to want to hear, we are talking with, the founder of White Dudes for Harris when we come back.
You're listening to The Big Picture with Edwin Eisendrath on WCPT 820.
Ross Raqueto Morales is back. When last we spoke, he was the co-founder and co-executive director of one of my favorite groups, Run for Something. Now he is that and more. He is also the founder and, I don't know, what would you say, was chief convener of White Dudes for Harris. Welcome back.
Thanks for having me. I love that title. I think I might start using it going forward.
Yeah. Well, look, before we launch into the phenomenal success you've had with White Dudes for Harris, first tell me, how did you go, from Run for Something to launching this new organizational effort?
Yeah, so I'm still working in my capacity at Run for Something. So I would say one might call it a side hustle, one might call it a second full-time job. We were inspired by the folks that Win with Black Women and Win with Black Men. When they did their calls, I was in San Francisco having dinner with a friend after those two calls happened, and he and I were chatting, and I said to him, who's doing the White Dudes call? Is someone doing it? And, his response was, I don't know. And I said back to him, does that mean we have to do it? And he was like, yeah, but I actually can't. I don't have time to do it, so it's all on you. Good luck. So I went back to my hotel room that night and sent a bunch of midnight text messages to some friends, and we got off to the races.
Well, race it has been. How many people joined that first call? How many are now part of the effort?
Yeah, so over 200,000 people joined the first call. We've had about 300,000 people watch the stream at some point total. And, we are hosting regular organizing calls now to get people to volunteer in their local communities, where we just released an ad not too long ago. So, we are engaging as many people as possible in this effort, and it's been an experience.
Yeah, I bet. I was on that first call, and I loved it. I mean, it's in such a whirlwind. I don't know if you even remember that first call, but you began it by having a black man join us, and and he said, Look, I am not a white dude, but over at the GOP convention that just ended, they're saying that all of you white guys believe the crazy stuff they're saying. That's not on me. You guys had better speak up. And I thought that was fabulous.
Yeah, Maurice Mitchell over at the Working Families Party is, I think, one of the visionaries in our movement. And, I think it was really important to have him at the top talk a little bit about why this work was so important to him and why it was meaningful to him, because ultimately it's not on other people to organize white men. It's not on black women. It's not on black men. It's not on Latinos. It's not on the AAPI community. It's not on white women. It's on us white dudes to organize ourselves.
When I know people who, when they hear what you just said, a conversation that talks about white men, black women, AAPI community, LGBTQ community, their reaction is, we are dividing America, that this is somehow some kind of micro-targeted effort that keeps us apart. It's identity politics at its worst. And I hear that from people, and I know how I answer them, but I'd love to hear how you answer that.
Yeah, I hear that a lot too. I think there's a couple of things. The first is that our job as organizers is to meet people where they are. Some people engage based on identity, and some people don't. And there's nothing wrong if somebody doesn't want to engage that way. But I think the reality is that is how a lot of people interact with and engage with the world, because their experience in the world is largely defined or is often defined by race, gender, LGBTQ status, etc. The second thing I'll say, I say to that is whether we want to admit it or not, whether we would like it to be that way or not, the world does interact with people in different ways based on who they are and how they present into the world. And so ignoring that ignores the way that the world actually functions. The divisions that we have aren't caused by people having identity. I would actually make the argument that the fact that most white people don't feel connected to any type of identity is actually an even bigger problem. So, white supremacy acts in many ways. One of the ways that it acts in is the fact that I myself am not in any way connected to my Polish heritage. That is actually what white supremacy does. And so I think, at its core, we can't spend at its core what people are, I think, in these conversations are often missing the really insidious piece of all of this, which is the way that our country functions encourages us to not be individuals. And I think that actually the fact that most of us, especially white people, or many of us, I'll say, have no real connection to our heritage, individuality, et cetera, is actually the real problem, rather than, whether somebody identifies as a white man or a black man or a black woman or a queer person or whatever.
That's so interesting, and it's so important. Forgive me, let's spend just a little more time on it, because I think it also ignores something not just ugly, but something truly beautiful. When I was a little kid, America was supposed to be a melting pot, and we were all supposed to be exactly alike, which was a certain kind of lie. We got to a place where we said, that's not right, we're a stew. We maintain our different identities, and that makes us the whole thing so much richer. And so when I listened on that call, what I heard was not, hey, you're different, we're going to support you in your own different way, but that everybody brings to this an obligation to be an ally, with people who aren't exactly the same. We bring different strengths that together can make us a more powerful democracy. And this sense of allyship, this sense of we are different and yet we're building something together that we all benefit from became really apparent to me on that call. And then, you know what? I have, not surprisingly, a family where, not everybody's a white dude. And they were on different sort of organizing calls in different communities, and it all felt the same. It's all about how do we come together with our differences intact and make a better America.
Yeah, I think that's totally right. And, like my wife is not white. She's Latina. And I think that's also that is also what I heard. The other thing that I think is really important, and I think, you live in Chicago, which is, I think one of the places in America where this is still the case, there's a diversity of white people. You have people who hail from different parts of the world who have maintained a lot of those identities. And those identities make us individuals. And those are beautiful. And those traditions are beautiful. And we shouldn't be giving up those traditions in pursuit of something else. And I think a thing that I didn't expect from the call that I really enjoyed was the fact that I got to hear, and this is going to sound funny and amusing, and it is to an extent, the diversity of white dudes that exists out there. We had people from rural communities on. We had people who are first-generation Americans on. We had folks who had just recently immigrated to the country on. We had people who've been here, since the Mayflower came, we're on. We had folks from different socioeconomic statuses, and I think we all have a diversity of experiences that both come from the lives that we live and the lives that our families before us have lived. And in order to, I think that is part of what people love about America and what makes America a beautiful place. And I think the idea that we wouldn't acknowledge those differences while also understanding that we can come together in spite of those differences, as you were saying, I think that ignores one of sort of the core fundamental promises of this country. And, I think when people talk about identity politics and the way that it's been weaponized, they're not wrong that identity politics in many ways has been weaponized, but it's mostly been weaponized on the right for the purposes of the politics of grievance. And we are doing something very different, which is we're bringing people together around something really beautiful. We brought together over 200,000 white dudes in support of the person who could be the first woman, the first Black, the first South Asian president of the United States. And I think that's really, really powerful.
I do too. And you're also breaking one of the greatly sort of strongest held notions in America, that diversity is about race. And diversity, in the way that you've described it, is about people. It's about people. It's about we all have our own histories. We are allowed to be individuals with our own ideas, and we embrace all of those differences. Some of that comes from our racial heritage, but not all of it. And, in America, we've just drawn this throughout our history. We've drawn this racial curtain down between people, and that has been enormously unfair to huge chunks of our population, but it's also damaged everybody else, the white population, by saying to them, hey, you know what? You're not a monolith. You actually have your own history, your own life, your own wonderful food. It's a sort of gorgeous thing that's underway, I think.
And I think that, the fact that we created a space where 200,000 white men got on to like feel a sense of belonging is a demonstration that there's a hunger out there for folks to feel like they have a space that's for them. And I think we've done really good. We have, as a movement, have like really made efforts to create spaces for lots of different types of groups where they could feel like they belonged and that those spaces were for them. And I think we have, in doing so, like ignored the fact that there's an entire coalition of folks that also feel like they want that space and don't feel like they have a space anywhere else. You know, I think a thing that you often hear, and you hear this a lot from white men who maybe were moderate Republicans or like something like that, and they'll say something like, you know, like, I feel like the Republican Party left me. And that's part of what they're saying. But another thing that they're also saying is that, like, they don't feel like they have a space where they can belong in our society, and that they felt like they could belong in the Republican Party. And then as the Republican Party moved further and further to the right and got crazier and crazier, they felt left behind. And I think we just have such an incredible opportunity to create space for those folks that isn't just political, because I think there's limitations in just creating like exclusively political spaces.
Yeah.
But is also a place where like they can have that sense of belonging, where they can have conversations with people, where they can learn, where they can grow together, where they can create community. Because the thing that we know is that there's a loneliness epidemic in America, and it especially is acute with men. And, you know, we can, as they say, kill two birds with one stone here.
The other thing that struck me, I've talked about this on the show a bunch. I think the Republicans, I mean, this has nothing to do with politics, and yet they've made it politics. They have a very unusual, I think, misinformed idea about what it is to be a man. I've been one, since I was a boy. I've been a man, and my idea of manhood is not that you have to beat the other guy down. It's not. I love sports, but manhood is not limited to some cartoonish wrestling match. That is not anything like who we are and what our obligations are, what our sacrifice is, what our love for people is, what our vision for the world is. There is I love men. We are not the cartoons that are on display in the Republican Party. They seem to think you just got to beat somebody down in order to prove who you are. The forum that you created, ostensibly about politics, and politics brought everybody into that, but some of the conversations addressed this notion of manhood in America in a way that was healthy.
Yeah, I think the way that the Republican and I think I'll say here the right, because I think it's like even broader than the Republican Party.
Yes.
Yes. I think they sort of have accidentally fallen into it more than it's been like a specific strategy of the party itself. But the right has found ways to weaponize masculinity and they do it for two ends. One, to make money. There's a lot of people making money off the weaponization of masculinity, and that's their primary motivator. And then the Republican Party has sort of taken advantage of that for political purposes in addition to that. And I think what that form of masculinity does is it destroys the individual, and it starts on the interior. And it basically, they turned it into a destructive ideology where you sort of have to become like some weird archetype that maybe isn't who you really are and is often who a lot of these folks aren't. And once it has sort of like enacted that at the individual level, it sort of acts as a virus and folks try to spread it, because once you've sort of destroyed your own self, your own individuality, you want others to like become like you. And so people go out and they try to spread it. They try to make other people be exactly what they are. And the thing is, if anyone else tried to do that in most of these people's lives, they would be extremely upset about it, you know? And I think that is the type of ideology that we need to be really pushing back on. And I think there are many folks on the right who are out there providing what seem like easy answers to things. I think Jordan Peterson, who's sort of like a quote unquote conservative intellectual who talks a lot about masculinity, is actually a really good example of this. You know, like if you just listen to some of the things that he says, he talks about things like get up early in the morning and exercise, make your bed, take pride in your work, you know, like get involved in your community, like have structure and discipline. And on its face, those things are actually not bad, right? Like that's like what every self-help book basically says.
Yep.
But then the second part of what he says is women are to blame for all of your problems. Feminism and women are the problem, and if it wasn't for them, like your life would be 100 million times better. And I think that's where things go significantly awry. And if he's providing an easy set of solutions, right? Like there's a scapegoat. Here's a plan for how you can get your life together. And I think we on the left, and I use the left like very, very broadly here as sort of like the people who like are not for that stuff, for lack of a better phrase, you know, haven't really done very much to push back on that. And it's really like bled and seeped out. There's nothing wrong with people. There's nothing wrong with men who want to be a provider, you know, like there's nothing wrong with folks who want to like protect their family. I think like there are like very core elements, I think, of sort of like underlying what folks would call traditional masculinity that on their face are actually not problematic. It's the way those things get weaponized into a culture of grievance that becomes the problem. And I think we really need to be pushing back on those types of folks and those types of ideologies and saying to people, you can be whatever you want to be. Like, whoever it is you are on the inside, you should be that person, and you should be able to be that person without fear or shame. And while that's a much harder place to get to with people, I think it's a much more powerful and generative place. And I think the more we push back, the more we can start to move folks in that direction.
Yep. So all of this is really important, and I love this conversation, but I have to say this is mostly a political show. So I want to turn to the politics of what you've done. I wanted to start with something much bigger than politics, which I think is so important. That's part of what you've done, and I think this weird idea about men that they have on that other side has bled into our politics in a terrible way. But now let's just go back to the politics of it. So you have brought, 250,000 people to an organizing effort. And these are people who mostly wanted to support but weren't sure how to support or wanted to show their support. So what are you asking them to do? Tell us about the new ad you have. Just talk about the politics of this movement.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of different types of folks that tuned in. One, clearly folks who are like engaged and activists and like want to do stuff. But when we looked at the data from the call, is that over 51% of our folks were either from red states or swing states. And we heard anecdotally.
Say that again.
51% of the folks who attended the call were either from red states or swing states.
That's awesome.
And and for what it's worth, I'm not sure that I didn't expect those numbers, if I'm being totally honest. It was the goal, but I wasn't sure we were going to be able to do it. And we heard anecdotally dozens of times from folks that were in their own sort of like local communities that there were conversations happening outside the bubble, outside sort of like the big city bubble about this. And that, we've gotten hundreds of emails from folks like in the aftermath with people asking questions about Vice President Harris and Governor Walz and things like that. So I think we for sure got a lot of people who were activists and we were working to engage those folks. We also got a lot of people who just weren't sure, which I think was part of our goal, was to get a lot of non-MAGA men who weren't totally sure but wanted to learn more. And so, we've done a couple of things. The first was the ad that we released last week, I believe. And, that is specifically targeted, at men who aren't totally sure and want to learn more. We are hosting, we launched 2 weeks ago, weekly organizing calls for anybody who wants to get involved in the campaign. And we're doing those every single week from now until Election Day. We've had over 2,500 people on each of the calls, I think. Interestingly enough, we've had about 2,600 people on the first call, about 2,500 people on the second call. And those were our registration numbers, too. So, we almost had a zero, our flake rate was almost 0%, which is basically unheard of in this kind of stuff. So, people are really jazzed. And what we're asking those folks to do is get involved in different types of races. So, on the first call, we had someone from the Harris-Walz campaign on to talk about volunteer opportunities and the way that they could get involved in the presidential campaign. Last call on Tuesday, we had somebody from Swing Left on to talk about getting involved in congressional and Senate races and also doing out-of-state volunteer work, letter writing and things like that. Mm-hmm. And then next week, we'll have somebody on from Sister District to talk about getting involved in state legislative races. And after that, we're going to try to have on folks from state parties to talk about getting involved in their volunteer efforts in very specific swing states. So,
Ross, I love your agenda sounds like the agenda of the radio show that I've been hosting for years. I love it. Love it.
It's really straightforward. We're bringing on a celebrity at the top of each call to get people fired up. Yep. Everyone then gets a training through our partners at the National Democratic Training Committee. Uh-huh. Then we've got a volunteer pitch at the end.
I love that. And the NDTC is also from Chicago. They're good folks.
They sure are.
Yep. So tell people who are listening, if they want to join the next call, how do they find you? What do they do?
Yeah, go to whitedudesforharris.com and sign up. It's really straightforward. You'll get an email probably at the end of this week with the link to sign up to our next organizing call, as well as all of the rest of the organizing calls. I'm sure a lot of your listeners are already volunteering on things. We use a Mobilize link so you can actually sign up for multiple calls at the same time, as well as other volunteer opportunities. All you got to do is go to whitedudesforharris.com.
And you've got swag. I want a hat.
We do. If you go to the website, there's a swag link. It will allow you to buy a hat. We've got koozies. We've got shirts. We've got baby onesies. So, if you want to go out, we have yard signs. So if you want to show that you're a white dude for Harris in your local community, you should You should buy some merch. I bought a yard sign. I have a shirt. I have a hat. If you need to order a koozie.
Hey, every time I think Americans are experts at political campaigns. I mean, there's a reason why our political folks get hired into elections all around the world. And every time I think, we are expert and we know what's happening, our world turns upside down and surprises us. This campaign has got in it things, the technology's changed so you can have a call with 200,000 people. And sure enough, we embraced it. We changed the way we campaign. I don't think this is in some ways, what happened after Joe Biden did the unthinkably gracious and unthinkably patriotic thing and said, you know what, I've done my best. It's time for a next generation. And he declined a nomination that was his. Since then, what's happened in our politics is like nothing I think the world has ever seen in its sort of bizarre combination of movement and hard knocks politics and data and outreach and community building. I think it's going to be good for the country because of the ways it's connected people in new and fabulous ways. And what you're doing is one of those ways, which is just so outstanding, Russ.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And to be honest, I have a lot of friends who work in like other countries or have done politics in other countries. Yep. And, the 3-month campaign is like pretty normal in a parliamentary system. And a lot, I found myself talking to a lot of those folks recently and having them be like, I told you so. Like, this is way better. And to be honest, I kind of love it. I kind of wish all of our campaigns could only had to be 3 months. This has been really fun. It's been a whirlwind. We're clearly right in the middle of silly season right now. But I think this has been a really interesting experience, and I'm really excited for the conversations that we're going to have at the end of this election cycle about how all this happened and what lessons we learned from it.
I am too, but that's going on the back burner for the next 32 days because we have to win.
Sure do.
Yep. Thank you, Russ. Thank you for the work. Thank you for coming on and sharing it. Thank you for what you've done for the country and for men. It's great.
Thank you for having me, as always. I really, really appreciate it.
Talk to you soon. Bye.
You're looking at the big picture with Edwin Eisendrath on WCPT 820.
Laura Bellin is the careful observer of Iowa politics, and she is back with us again. She publishes Bleeding Heartland. I've told you about it. It's indispensable for understanding Iowa. But look, I keep coming back to Iowa. It's a solid red state, or so many thought, a rural state, a tiny state. And yet, as I've been telling you for years now, it's a state we need to pay attention to because so much of what's right, as well as what's wrong with our country, is on display there. Laura, welcome back.
Oh, thanks for having me, Edwin.
So, look, since you and I began these discussions, 3 years ago, the state has taken a sharp turn to the right, tossing constitutional protections aside to restrict abortion rights, legalizing child labor, ignoring massive environmental damage. And yet, something's going on in Iowa. And you can see it in the polls, and I wonder if you feel the same way.
Well, first of all, the best news that we have in Iowa is that we don't have gerrymandering. So that means that if Democrats can start to make a comeback, we are going to have fair elections. We're not going to be just locked out of the system. And you see that now where 2 of our 4 congressional districts are considered highly competitive, and Republican-aligned groups are pouring more money into those districts. So we still have a lot of competitive races. Our state legislature has large Republican majorities right now, but we do still have some competitive seats, and we're going to just have to see if Democrats can take advantage of that. But certainly there is more energy here. I mean, the switch from Biden to Harris just caused a surge in energy. You see it not just anecdotally. I hear it from sources from all corners of Iowa, even in heavily red rural counties. But you also saw that in the latest Iowa poll by Ann Seltzer, who's one of the best political pollsters in the business for the Des Moines Register. And she showed not only that Kamala Harris was only 4 points behind Donald Trump here, but just that there was a massive surge in excitement and enthusiasm from Democrats, and the hope is that that's going to help candidates down ticket.
Your governor, if these polls are to be believed, has never been less popular.
That's right. And she's never been that. It's very interesting. Morning Consult has been doing these polls about every 3 months. They do approval polls on all 50 governors in the country. And our governor, Kim Reynolds, has always been kind of near the bottom of the pack. I mean, even during COVID, I feel that her leadership style was very divisive and not unifying. So as where a lot of other governors had a surge in popularity during a crisis, I felt like even at the height of the pandemic, her popularity was not that great. And she has slipped. We were just talking about that with another group of political writers in Iowa, the Iowa Writers Collaborative. And I think that one thing that may be going on now is that finally our near total abortion ban was able to take effect this summer. Unfortunately, the Iowa Supreme Court allowed that law to be enforced. It had been on hold for years. And so I think people are starting to wake up to see this is really terrible. And also some of the bad things that have happened with public schools, massive school voucher program, undermining a special education system we had called area education agencies. All of those things, the effects are starting to be felt now all across the state. And I think that could be affecting our governor's approval rating as well. But she's even, like I said, even at the height of the pandemic, she was never that popular. So she didn't build herself a strong base like some Republican governors in other states were able to be genuinely popular by reaching out across the aisle.
Your description reminds me of some very important idea that people have to keep in mind. You know, good government should be a virtuous cycle. You govern well, voters should recognize it and do some good things. But the truth is, it takes, for good or ill, it takes a long time. You know, I'm thinking about Obamacare. He passed it. It was considered political poison for years. It cost Democrats their jobs. Now, people who want to oppose it pretend they don't because it's popular, right? Mm-hmm. Good legislation takes a while. And in this case, what you're saying is it's a disastrous government put in place by Republicans in Iowa. Has taken a while for people to begin to really feel it and react.
I think that there's just been such a cultural change. I mean, in many ways, we live in a much more partisan time now. But some years ago, I was talking with a Republican who was a House Speaker of the Iowa House during the 1990s. And he was talking about how they worked on a tax cut at that time. And instead of just trying to pass the most extreme bill that they could pass with a Republican majority, they made some tweaks to it to try to bring Democrats on board. And they managed to pass it with a very large bipartisan majority. And that's the kind of thing that just doesn't happen now, whether you want to blame Newt Gingrich or whoever it was who brought in this idea that any concession you make to bring on a Democratic vote is a waste, and you should just go for the hardest line thing that you can possibly get a bare majority for. That's the way Republicans have governed in Iowa. They have not tried to forge any kind of consensus. So we end up having a very divisive governor, and I think that that's what you're seeing now with the approval ratings, but also just the policy impact is really devastating, especially on issues that didn't used to be that partisan, like school funding. I mean, Republicans and Democrats used to disagree about the level of school funding, but the overall idea that public funds should go toward public schools and not private schools, that used to be a consensus idea.
Well, closing schools in rural areas is not going to go over well, I don't think, with anybody. And they're not going to be able to blame Democrats, no matter what they say.
Right. And that's been happening. School district consolidation has been going on in Iowa for 40 or 50 years. But I think we're about to see an acceleration of that. There was one school district that just voted to close this year, and that was the first one since, I think, 2015. And as the school vouchers get phased in, and we're starting to see more private schools be planned or in the process of opening, more charter schools in the process of opening, and all of that is going to cut into the student enrollment. And the way school funding works in Iowa is that it's based on a certain amount of money per pupil. So that if the state might, let's say they increase funding per pupil by 3%. Well, if your school has declining enrollment, you're still going to get less money next year than you got this year, even if the per pupil amount slightly increased and not by enough to account for inflation anyway. So a lot of school districts, now my kids went through the Des Moines Public Schools. That's the largest district in Iowa, about 30,000 students. And certainly all of these policies hurt school districts, large and small, but the impact is going to be much greater in these smaller school districts. They just do not have the leeway. If they lose some of them, even 15 or 20 students, that can just be catastrophic for their budget.
Yeah. Well, so we have this impact. We have political partisanship sort of means that at the end of the day, people know who to blame for the policies. It's really hard to point the finger. You know, partisan time. You can claim everything's great when it's not, but people figure it out. Hey, in the presidential race, am I right that Nikki Haley's campaign team in Iowa has now endorsed Kamala Harris?
Well, only one of her co-chairs. So a person, Dawn Roberts, just an absolute classic, whatever you want to call it, country club Republican, old-fashioned Republican. She and her late husband, Steve Roberts, they were just like bedrock Republicans. Steve Roberts, in fact, was a former state party chair, was a Republican national committeeman for Iowa for about 20 years until 2008. And Steve and Dawn Roberts, Dawn Roberts was actually the first woman to lead the Republicans in the Polk County, which is the largest county in Iowa that contains the Des Moines area. And she was one of Nikki Haley's co-chairs before the Iowa caucus, and she did come out last week and endorse Kamala Harris. That was the first. I've been waiting to see, who would be the first, or would there even be any Haley supporters in Iowa who would endorse Harris? And so far, she's the only one I know about. Any of the state legislators who backed Haley before the caucuses have either kept very quiet, or I know one of them told the Des Moines Register he's still behind Trump. But the Republican establishment in Iowa was always much more solidly behind Trump than some other states. We just didn't really have any meaningful kind of never Trump faction like what you saw in some other states. So I thought it was very striking. And like I said, there are a lot of moderate Republican women, and I hope that some of them are listening to what Dawn Roberts said. And I thought one of the most poignant things, she talked about how she felt that Kamala Harris would be inclusive. She liked her speech at the DNC. She liked the fact that Harris has said that she might invite a Republican to join her cabinet. But she also said that, her late husband, Steve, although she misses him every day, sometimes she's glad that he wasn't around to see what happened on January 6, 2021. And that is just such a sad commentary on where we are as a country, and also the fact that she is one of very few Iowa Republicans who will come out and say publicly that was unacceptable.
Okay. It was unacceptable. You can say it, and I can say it, and most of the country knows it was unacceptable.
Yeah, but right now, if you want to have a future in Republican politics, and of course Dawn Roberts she's active as a volunteer, but she's not an office holder. She's not going to be running for office. Right now, I just think that for Iowa Republicans, it would be very costly politically to come and speak out against Trump. And I really admired some of the Republicans who spoke at the DNC, particularly Jeff Duncan, the former lieutenant governor of Georgia, because here's someone, a relatively young guy, really he had a lot to lose, and he was willing to give that up to stand up for what's right. And you just don't see that very often in politics. I mean, we didn't even somebody like Chuck Grassley, our senator, who could have been an elder statesman and a real hero by holding Trump accountable, but he doesn't have the political courage to do that.
I don't mean the party of Project 2025 and Donald Trump. You have to have a certain personality, I guess, to say that, oh my, I want a future as part of that. I mean, most decent people would say, I don't want any part of it. Future in that party? That's disgusting. Why would I want to do that?
Well, it is interesting. I mean, I grew up during the Reagan years, and you would probably remember, I don't know how many of your listeners would remember, Republicans did very well among young voters in the 1980s. So,
sure
they were very confident about being able to win elections and looking toward the future winning elections. And what you see with Project 2025 and similar state-level efforts is that they've almost just given up on even trying to be a majority party. It's just, how can we suppress the vote? How can we govern as a minority, make it just manage to seize power and make it difficult for the other side to exercise power? You saw it like in Wisconsin, where the gerrymandered legislature tried to strip powers away from the Democratic governor. I mean, it's like they've acknowledged now that they, especially looking forward, they're not going to be winning the popular vote nationally in any presidential election for a while, probably. So that's not even a goal of theirs. And it's kind of wild when you think about it, because the Republican Party for many years was very successful at winning elections.
Very. So Laura, this may be deep in the woods, but I think people can handle it. Iowa has long had a libertarian streak, and you had a libertarian party. It looks like the Republicans saw it as a threat and killed it. Am I reading that correctly?
Well, we had a very unfortunate situation. So what Edwin's referring to is that 3 libertarian candidates were planning to run for Congress, including in 2 of the highly competitive U.S. House districts, and Republican activists managed to get them knocked off the ballot. It was a hardball move by the Republicans. I didn't agree with the court decision on it, but also I have to say that the Libertarian Party didn't really follow the normal process for getting a candidate on the ballot. They followed a convention process, which Iowa law allows, and then they didn't do everything correctly. So I would have said that they still should be on the ballot, because consistently libertarians get about 2 to 3% of the vote here, and I would say that their party substantially complied, but our courts disagreed and said that basically they didn't dot all the I's and cross all the T's. So it was very unfortunate from my perspective, and I think it's a big benefit. If there were libertarians on the ballot in our 1st and 3rd congressional districts, I think that would really improve the chances of the Democratic challengers there. In fact, I think in the 3rd district, where we have a first-term incumbent, Zach Nunn, I think that if a libertarian had been on the ballot in 2022, he probably wouldn't have even been successful, because he only won by about 0.6% of the vote, and normally libertarians are pulling about 2%. So yeah, the Republicans, I mean, I can't say the Libertarians were blameless, because they should have just followed the normal procedure and collected signatures to qualify for the ballot in the normal way, and then they wouldn't have been vulnerable to this Republican attack. But in any case, they, as like many minor parties, they don't have the same capacity and level of organization and level of sophistication, and in this case, Republican activists were able to take advantage of that.
All right, so just we got a little late start. I know we're going to be short on time. Just talk us through. You have 4 congressional districts, right? And what's the partisan makeup of all 4, and what is it? What could it be? After the election.
So we have 4 districts, and they're all Republican-leaning, at least. One is very solidly Republican, the northwest part of the state. That's the area that Steve King represented for many years, probably. Most people out there have heard of him. Right now represented by Randy Feenstra, and that's not considered a very competitive district. We have the 1st district, which covers much of southeast Iowa. It includes Iowa City, the Iowa side of the Quad Cities, a bunch of Mississippi River towns from Clinton to Burlington to Muscatine and Keokuk, and that has a partisan lean of about R+3 if you look at the results, but the trend lines are very bad for Democrats there. So many of these communities used to be solidly Democratic for generations and are now supporting Republicans. So that's why it has, most people still consider that a slightly Republican-leaning district. Marinette Miller-Meeks is the incumbent. However, I saw that Inside Elections this past week just moved that rating to toss-up in that 1st congressional district. The 2nd district covers much of northeast Iowa. In theory, that is not that solidly Republican. It's about an R+4 partisan lean, but the Democratic candidate there hasn't raised a lot of money, and the Republican has a big advantage, and so that 2nd district is not really being targeted. That includes Cedar Rapids, Dubuque, Waterloo. So the 3rd district, which is where I live, that's most of the Des Moines metro area and a bunch of counties to the south of Des Moines, stretching to Ottumwa in the southeast part of the state. That one is, again, it's about an R+3 lean if you look at the recent presidential results. However, Biden and Trump virtually tied in 2020 in the counties that currently make up that district. So, again, depending on which forecaster you look at, that's either a toss-up or a slightly Republican-leaning district. But I will say that Republican groups are piling more money into there, and they're not releasing any internal poll numbers. So that tells me that they're not feeling very confident about their chances. So really, the 1st and the 3rd district are 2 seats that could very plausibly flip. I wouldn't be surprised either way. I wouldn't be surprised if Republicans hold them, but I also wouldn't be surprised if Democrats pick up both of them.
So I guess the only surprise would be if it were a landslide either way.
Yes, and we tend to have close elections here. Again, like I said, the districts aren't gerrymandered. So, in fact, Marinette Miller-Meeks in that 1st district in the southeast part, she had the closest U.S. House rates in the country in 2020. She won by 6 votes out of about 394,000 cast. Now, in the 2022 midterms, she won by more like 6%, but Democratic turnout was just really terrible, falling through the floor during the midterms. Democrats are very, like I mentioned, they're very pumped up about Kamala Harris, and the Democratic turnout should be better this year, certainly considerably better than it was in 2022. I don't know if it's going to quite hit that 2020 level, but the big question, and both of the Democratic challengers, Lana McComb in the 3rd district and Christina Bohannon in the 1st district, talking a lot about abortion rights, reproductive freedom, and now that an abortion ban is in effect in Iowa, that could be a more salient issue for voters here. If Democrats win those districts, I think that abortion certainly would be one of the deciding factors.
Right, but we have a Senate candidate in Ohio saying, well, it can't be interesting to any woman who's over 50.
I mean,
how could
honestly,
they possibly care?
Has this guy talked to any women? Because the women who are old enough to remember life before Roe, those are often the most passionate women about reproductive rights. I mean, and also, by the way, has he ever realized that a lot of women have daughters and granddaughters who might be of childbearing age? I mean, that was just a bananas thing to say. But it was some of the things that he says, and J.D. Vance, it's a whole worldview. It's not just an off-the-cuff comment. It's an idea that a women's value and utility is based on what they do with their uteruses. I mean, it's really quite incredible, and you can't just brush it off as 1 or 2 gaffes.
Well, so more seriously, and I talked about this earlier on the show with Michael Tomasky, America's birth rates are going down, and they're going down dramatically. And,
right.
The Republican, that's not great replacement theory. That's people saying, I can't afford to have children. I can't figure out how to raise my kid. It's too difficult. We could have policies in this country that make it easier to start a family, that make it easier to raise kids. But the Republicans don't want to do that. So instead, they want to tell women, we don't care how much you suffer, you will have that baby.
Yeah, and the ProPublica series from a few months ago about following the woman in Tennessee who was unable to get an abortion and just the cataclysm for her family and the children she already had. I mean, it's just a disaster. And some of these states with abortion bans, you're right. I mean, they don't want to have a better safety net. In fact, they make it harder to get access to Medicaid or food assistance or whatever, you name it. I mean, the dumbest thing that Congress has done probably in the last several years was letting that child tax credit expire. I mean, that paid for itself monumentally just by lifting millions of kids out of poverty. That would have had, I mean, it had so many good effects, and it wasn't really that costly, honestly. So compared to a lot of outcomes of poverty, which are much more costly. So, but there's no, it is about controlling women. It's really not about what's best for women and families and children. Certainly not.
No. All right, one last thing, Laura, before we go. And again, I want to go back to these potential pickups in congressional races in Iowa. You know what interests me a lot is that the House is actually sworn in on January 3rd.
Yes, yes.
3 days before the certification of the next election. So wouldn't it be great if Iowa made it possible to take the gavel out of Speaker Johnson's hands and hand it to Hakeem Jeffries so that we can be sure that there won't be nonsense when we count the votes?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's a scenario I really worry about a lot. And I saw an event this week on Thursday. Former Senator Tom Harkin was there, and one of my colleagues, Doug Burns, was covering the event. And Tom Harkin said, I'm worried that Trump could win, but I'm also worried that Trump could lose and that there could be another insurrection. I mean, it is a very scary scenario if Republicans have control of Congress on January 6th. And I think it's very doable. I saw very encouraging polling out of the Omaha Congressional District, as well as the presidential race in Omaha. It's actually a longtime Iowa Democratic campaign hand who's running the coordinated campaign in Omaha. And hopefully we are going to do our part and, like you said, make sure that Mike Johnson is not the speaker on January 6th.
Yeah, that's going to be the last word. Thank you, as always, Laura. Really great to catch up.
Oh, thanks so much for having me on, Edwin.
All right, we're going to take a break, and when we come back, your calls.
You're looking at the big picture with Edwin Eisendrath on WCPT 820.
Before I ask Jim to kick us off, just a moment to say that all of us up here in the upper Midwest are thinking about everybody down in the cleaning up and trying to get through the damage caused by that terrible hurricane. Our thoughts are with all of you guys. Hang in there. Okay, Jim.
Hi, Edwin. How were things in Monte Carlo? Was it your vacation?
Yeah. I did really well with it. Yeah, Banco, I think they say, right?
At the roulette table.
Yeah.
But my mind is wandering to after Trump's defeated on November 5th. Jack Smith is reworking these cases. He's going to be sentenced. And then we finally get a good look at January 6th, and we get a good look at the document case, and we get a good look at these things in the whole country. The 320 million Americans get an opportunity to see the real McCoy of what's really going on with the COP candidate. I can guarantee 2026, the way I feel is this way. I think the economy is improving greatly. To me, it's one of the most dynamic economies in my memory as it goes forward. And Harris in 2 years, even if we blow the Senate maybe by one, I'm feeling that we could really make some hay. The Democrats can make some hay in 2026 because Trump will be out of the picture. Where the journalists are going to go at that point, I have no idea. They'll have to pick somebody. But the Republicans will be forced at some point to make policy decisions rather than running on cultural ideas of denying women's rights and LGBTQ and all this other nonsense, which has nothing to do with anybody's life, really, at all. And they'll be forced to come to some kind of an idea where they have to come up with some policy, rather than running on just one nut that they put their eggs in one basket behind this guy. They'll pay a price for it. I know they will, because I know that Smith will rework these cases, and I know that they'll get an opportunity to see what they were supporting. And they'll have to. I mean, when Nixon was finally kicked out of office, I was always kidding my Republican friends. I said, "Where's the helicopter for Trump? They'll have to get a new door because it's behind it, 10 times the size of Nixon's." But the point is, it'll give us a great advantage once we see actually the nightmare that this guy has visited on the country. Anyway, I'm glad to have you back, Edwin, and I hope the callers get a chance to talk. Thank you, Edwin.
Yeah. Hey, listen, I hope you're right. But one thing we have to learn, we cannot do what happened when Barack Obama was president. We have to keep our eye on the politics as well as the governing. You'll recall that what happened in 2010, just 2 years into his administration, was the biggest sort of sweep the Democrats out in memory, maybe since Newt Gingrich, and that led to the gerrymandering that has caused so much pain over so many Americans all over the place. So we have to do the politics right and not just the governing right. And I hope that's a lesson we've all learned. All righty. Paul, how are you?
Good, thank you, Edwin. So the election is in 38 days, 5 weeks, and in the next 5 weeks, the undecided voters are going to begin to coalesce. Those who are undecided about who to vote for, which I don't think is really a question, but more whether they're going to vote. So given that the undecided voter is not a terribly, how should I say, they're not a nuanced and complex perspective on the issues. It's going to be more one issue, and what issue is going to be the issue of the election? What do you think?
Oh, I think abortion is probably the biggest issue.
Yeah, it is, and the reason is because it's the one. This is what's astonishing to me. It's the issue that the MAGA party is losing their butts on, yet they keep doubling down on more and more stupid things about it. They have failed to make their case about immigration. They just haven't done that. I mean, I thought that was their trump card, but they have not managed to do that. And I think the reason is because this big crisis of immigration is really not generally most people's experience. Nobody said, "Oh yeah, my dog got eaten by an immigrant." And the other one is, sorry, but the whole thing on the economy, they lost that one. Economy, even though people are willing to repeat the media line that, oh yeah, the economy is terrible, they also think that their personal economy is doing pretty good. And the numbers show that. The economic growth, the GDP, has been very good, over 3%. This has been a sustained 3%, and that hasn't happened in a while. And inflation now nearing 2%, and the Fed just lowered interest rates for the first time in quite some time. They don't have the economy. So the Republicans just it's kind of like they keep stepping in it. And I've never seen anything like it. Nobody's ever seen anything like it.
Hey, Paul, when you say a sustained 3%, I want people to understand compounding. If we go 3% a year in, year out, I think it was Einstein who said the most powerful force in the universe was compound interest.
Yeah.
No one is going to catch us. No one is going to catch us.
Right. You got 3% on more money every year.
Yep.
You got 3% on a bigger growth. By the way,
yep.
I pointed this out to people. You don't hear. Okay, I just want to just make this quick. I've made this point before, but it bears repeating. When Trump was in office and bragging about how great his economy was, let's just go back and review that the statistics show that he had about his average growth in the 4-year term was 2.5%. Not terrible, but not great. about the same as Obama's second term. Not terrible, not great. He had one quarter that was over 3%, second quarter 2019. But here's what he really made up. He knows that the American people think the stock market is the most relevant indicator of the economy. And when he took over from Obama's last day, the stock market, Obama bottomed out at 65.42 on March 9th, 2009. On the last day in office, it was 19,799, more than tripled. That's where Trump took over. 19,800. And then Trump said it was a sacred day, a sacred number when the stock market hit 30,000. That is 10,200 points more. And that was on Tuesday, November 24th, 2020, 3 weeks after Trump lost the election. And that was also the same day that the states certified their popular votes. Okay, so the Trump stock market, even if you want to say that's really the economy that Americans understand, 10,200 points in 4 years. So let's say Biden picked up at 30,000. It actually fell below that, but let's say 30,000. Biden picks up. The stock market has been over 42,000. That's 12,000 points in less time. That's 17% more than Trump. Yet we don't hear the media talking about that at all. If 30,000 is a sacred number, 40,000 is a really sacred number.
Right. The economy isn't just bigger. For the first time, we're also beginning to crack a 30-year bad habit of making sure that when the economy got bigger, only the big people got the benefits. We've finally begun to make those changes that will help ordinary Americans share in the prosperity they work so hard to create. And that is fundamental to the promise of what it means to be America. And, that goes back to FDR. And it has been something that Republican fat cats have been fighting for 100 years, packing the court to do it, capturing federal agencies in order to do it, and gerrymandering all over the country in order to do it. But this time, Americans have said, no, we're not doing it. And they're terrified.
Yeah. And I think this is...
And they'll still be rich. I don't know why they're actually terrified. They'll still be fabulously rich.
Yeah. Well, when you get too addicted to that, then it's like you never can have enough. I really think that that's the mentality that those kind of people have, is that they can never, it'll never be enough. And it's not the American dream. The American dream isn't a guarantee that you can be a trust within yourself and be a threat to the economy yourself. It's not that. And it wasn't founded on no taxes or even low taxes. It was founded on, the nation was founded on taxation with representation. And they are, the ultra rich have been far overrepresented in the Congress by the kind of, both gerrymandering and lobbying. So that's the way I see it.
Well, and please don't leave Citizens United off that list. The idea that freedom of reach, being able to have a biggest megaphone is the same thing as freedom of speech. It's not.
Unbelievable.
Yep.
Thanks, Edwin.
Oh, you bet. Good to talk to you. All right, I'm taking your calls at 773-763-9278. And let me just reflect on some of the conversations that we've had. I thought in my conversation with Ross Raqueto Morales about white dudes for Harris was really interesting. I mean, only the last 10 minutes of it were about politics. The rest was about political organizing, but also an acknowledgement that America I don't want to say white men have lost their way. That's not what I mean. But that America's been, it hasn't let all these white men really have their own identity, sort of bundled them all together. And that was fodder for the right wing and the nationalists. But once you say to all of these folks, hey, you guys are different. You have different needs. You have different histories. You have different cultural backgrounds, just like everybody that's valued in America, that suddenly it was a call to lots of people, and it was a call that was really different than that, cartoon of what it means to be a man on display by the Republicans. This notion that, it's all wrestling and it's a man's job to beat the other guy into the dust. It's not. And I thought that was a lovely conversation, very helpful and very positive about our whole country, not just about our politics. And of course, Michael Tomasky at the beginning of the show reflecting on, what it means for a policy guy in a policy magazine to have to take a breath right now and write about the nonsense that's coming out of the mouths of the president and vice president candidates in the Republican Party. Can you imagine you spend your whole career thinking about public policy, analyzing policy, thinking very carefully about how to tweak the economy so that it's more fair rather than less fair. And instead, you have to write about a vice presidential candidate claiming people are eating their neighbor's cats. Right? And this thing that the Republicans are doing, this outrage after outrage. And Michael's prediction, and I agree, that Donald Trump, who, as we know, is jealous of when a hurricane gets front page coverage, is going to have to do even crazier things in the next 30 days to stay in front of the news. And you know what? He is among the most creative, crazy politicians we've ever seen. So who knows what he's going to do, but it isn't going to be good. Surely isn't going to be good. And J.D. Vance, we know who he is. He is a hater, deep, just hater. How could a senator do so much damage in his own state? Really? Just shredding a city in his own state with lies. And he says, I'm lying, but it's good for me. And instead, they're closing the schools in a city in his state because of his lies. Where is the outrage? I'm not reading that in the Washington Post. I'm not reading that in the New York Times. The outrage. How dare these people? How dare they do this to us? And this notion that we see when we talk about what they're doing in Georgia with the vote, with the ability to, as Brad Raffensperger, the Republican, says, they just pass a law that they can break into the ballot boxes. I mean, look. Again, how dare they? They're trying to undermine the idea. We're going to win anyway, and we're going to continue to have faith in our democracy, despite that their goal is to destroy that faith so that the only thing left standing is who's strongest. But the thing is, we are strongest. But we have to look our neighbors in the eye and say, we're standing together. And here's, for my friends who are way on the left, when Kamala Harris says, yeah, I'm open to having a Republican in my government, to me, as Michael Tomasky says, he's not crazy about all the border stuff, but she's got to win. I have friends who are like, oh my gosh, this Gaza thing, how can you possibly support anybody who's even been remotely part of sending arms to that part of the world? And yet, when you think about the alternatives, this is a coming together. No one's getting everything they want. A lot of us in the middle are getting a lot of what we want, but nobody's getting everything. So is this a time to stand on the sidelines and say, if I don't get anything, if I don't get everything I want, I'm going to let Donald Trump win, take down the greatest democracy that's ever lived, or wreak havoc in the world, sell out Ukraine, be bamboozled by Xi in China. I mean, you just can imagine America will be smaller, nastier, less of a model for anything. But on the other hand, oh my gosh, as I said the very first time I took this microphone, it isn't just that we are facing an incredible authoritarian backlash. It's also that we have the opportunity to create something that's never existed in the world, a real multiracial, multi-faith democracy where power is shared and we look after each other, where we come together and we do the hard but practical work of moving us all forward. I am so excited about that future. And you know what that will say to the whole world? Oh my gosh, we can get along. Because America looks like the whole world. We are, after all, notwithstanding the threats to throw everybody out, we are a nation filled with people who come from all over the world. And if we can get along, and we can't, organize around our animosities, instead we can organize around our shared interests. That's what Democrats have on offer. You have 32 days. Make best use of every one of them. Make a list today, 32 names long. Each day, call one of them. Talk about this race. Make sure the person you talk to is registered. Make sure they have a plan to vote. It's not that hard. You can do it from your basement. Everybody do it. Everybody, now. Listen, thank you for having me back in your living rooms, in your cars, wherever you're listening. I appreciate your patience with me while I was gone. I'm happy to be back. We will talk again next week. And for those of you in the South, in the Southeast, may your recovery come very quickly. Take care.